Okay, welcome. Thanks for joining us for our live workshop this evening as part of our Take Action on Your Passion membership. And if you're watching the recording, welcome to the replay. Today, we're going to be learning all about setting boundaries. And this is so important, I find, not just for myself, but for everybody that I work with, or my girlfriends I come into contact with, my daughters, everybody, I think needs to learn how to do this. And certainly so many of us as women, as mothers who are perpetual people pleasers, natural caregivers, this is something I think that's so important to us so that we can carve out the time and preserve the resources and the energy for us to actually be able to, here's this back, to put ourselves first for change and actually make time for our needs and our priorities. And when I met Melissa Bowen, who is an expert on this very topic, I had to invite her to come speak to our members. Melissa is a licensed professional counselor, a clinic coach, and a certified Daring Way facilitator. Her passion and work are devoted to helping women embrace their authenticity, avert the midlife crisis, and reconstruct the life they all love to live. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us to share your expertise and on this very, very important topic. I'm going to turn it over to you now. And I know Melissa mentioned to me that anybody, especially because we have such a nice small group today, should feel free to interrupt, ask questions. You can just raise your physical hand like this. And then if you have other thoughts that you want to remember to bring up maybe at the end, or you want me to bring up, I'll be watching the chat. So you can also put something in the chat, but feel free to just raise your hand. And if you want to make a comment or ask Melissa a question. So Melissa, thank you for being here.
Len, thank you so much for having me, because I really could talk on boundaries forever. I do think it's such an important topic for every reason that you said. Because it allows us to have the freedom and joy that we want in our lives. But there's just so much to learn about it. So ladies, I'm really glad to be with you guys. And like she said, I can see everyone. So if you raise your hand, I should be paying attention. Feel free to just interrupt with any questions or tell me to slow down or anything you need. I'm happy to answer as we go through. I have a workbook, just like a couple of pages that I gave to Ellen. She's going to send that to you guys, I think tonight or tomorrow. Is that correct? And it's everything that I'm about to show you on the slideshow. It is everything that I'm about to talk to you about. So if you miss a note or anything, please don't worry about it. You're about to get it in print later. But I'm going to share my screen so that you can see and read things as I'm talking about it too. And so we'll just kind of jump in and get started.
And just a quick note that I'm muting everybody just so that we don't have the ambient noise, but certainly if you raise your hand, you'll just have to remember to unmute yourself.
Okay. And so can y'all see this? Okay, thumbs up. Okay. And so I know some of the print might be small. I promise you it will not be small on all the slides. But to start with, I kind of want to get your mind primed for the information. I want to invite you to think of a person or a situation that is a consistent source of possible frustration for you. It doesn't have to be big and major. Could be just a small irritant, a situation or a person. If you could just think in your head, don't have to name any names or put it in the chat, but for yourself, if you can think of one. And when you have one in your mind, give me a thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, Jill, she knew that right off the bat. She's like, I know who I'm talking about. Gretchen, you're good. Felicia, okay. And if y'all want to take notes too, I highly encourage writing things down too. So usually when we are in a situation or we have a person that is a consistent source of frustration, our natural mind thinks, I would feel so much better if they changed. I would feel so much better if that situation were different. And that is true. However, that is what we cannot control. The other people are things and people that we cannot control. And so really the way that we can get our relief and release from those frustrations and get the peace that we're seeking is by boundaries. And it's really by addressing our boundaries. And so that's kind of why it's important to learn what boundaries are, so that the relief of peace, the relief for peace, can be put squarely in your power and not waiting for the other people and circumstances in our world to change. So as we go through this, if you can just keep your situation or your person in the back of your mind, and as you have questions, again, feel free to open up about them, or ask questions. So with boundaries, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and maybe raise your hand if you feel like you've ever had this thought about boundaries. Can I set limits and still say no and still be a loving person? Like, I wonder if it questions if it makes me a loving person that I can say no. I don't know if I know what legitimate boundaries are. What are legitimate boundaries? What if someone's upset or hurt by my boundaries? Yeah. How do I answer someone who wants my time, my love, my energy, or my money? What's a good answer for someone who is asking that of us if we don't have it to give? Why do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? And aren't boundaries considered selfish? Couldn't a boundary be selfish? And when we say boundaries, that's the healthy version of it. What if saying no isn't saying no considered selfish or hurtful? That makes it hard to say no. And I'll tell you this story maybe a little bit later, but today I said no to my church, or yesterday, I actually said no to my church. But that's why I title this, we have to say no in certain areas in our lives so that we can have a best yes for ourselves. And so that's where boundaries become very healthy for us. So let's define what is a boundary, so it's not just some hippy dippy counseling jargon. A boundary is a limit. It's a limit that determines what is my responsibility and what isn't. And I'm going to keep doing this because I like to envision it like imagine your fence around your property. Your property line, whether it's a fence or not, determines what's inside my boundaries and what is not. What is my responsibility? What is not? Like, you wouldn't go cut your neighbor's grass because that's not in your limits. That's their responsibility. And you wouldn't allow them to throw garbage in your yard because that's yours. They should keep theirs, you keep yours. Another way to define a boundary is where each individual begins and ends. So like if it's you and I, where do I end and you begin, and vice versa? So what is me or what is not me? A boundary is ownership, and a boundary can also be considered what is okay and what is not okay. There is a line there, a limit between what is okay and what is not okay. And so that, by definition, hopefully you can see that there's going to be a line to cross somewhere, and we'll go through all the ways to look at how you define that for yourself for each situation and each relationship. So the functions of boundaries, this is where the power is and why it's so important. So again, a boundary would define things. So that gives a lot of clarity. When something has a definition, it's not just, oh, I'll see how I feel. My feelings have changed like 400 times just today. But a boundary would define relationships, would define roles. And so there's some definition in having a boundary. A boundary can also be distinction. It would distinguish what I'm responsible for versus what you are responsible for. The protection one, that's the one I really do like to define boundaries as one of their most important functions. A boundary protects what is good. It protects your resources, which is your time, your energy, your money, your love, and a bunch of other things we'll talk about, but it's an act of protection. And it can be fluid, like you decide how high or how low, how far, how close your limits are. It's not just a wall I put up and I can't see past it, but it's something, again, that's in my control. So, but it's protecting what I find that's good in me so that I can be the healthiest version of me. The other function of boundaries, the last one, is it allows for your freedom. It allows for your healthy care for yourself. Again, saying no to others and no to other people and things allows for a yes and investment for yourself. How's this sounding so far? You guys, let me ask, what do you think of the function of protection as a boundary? Because a lot of times we think of it as a threat or discipline. But how would you feel like a boundary could be protection for you? Anybody?
I mean, I like the idea of a boundary as protection. It sounds like a more, it sounds like a better way to put it, you know.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead, Gretchen. I see your mic is off.
Oh, well, I was just, thinking that in the survivor world, obviously knowing your boundary and saying no to someone who's violating it is a very good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it does protect you from something that, could otherwise harm you.
Be very harmful. Yeah. And so a lot of times when the world, and you talk about a survivor world, the world is going to come at us at various stages and levels of intensity. And there's another word that I can't think of, but the world's going to come at us. And so that's why it's good for us to learn where our limits are so that our freedom, our safety, and the things that we want to protect, that we feel more empowered and less at the whim of the people and situations in our world. So, and that's the goal. Felicia, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, unmute.
I think it would not be a stretch to say it even protects your integrity. Because when you enable yourself to say no, so that you can remain true to yourself and your own goals and authenticity, that's a manner of protection of your integrity, I think.
Definitely. When I teach about being authentic and as we all embrace what our midlife looks like, what does being authentic mean to you? What feels good and true for you? When we start to try to show up like that, it's going to require our boundaries so that we can show up as ourselves and with our integrity intact, our authenticity intact. That's a great point, Felicia. Yeah, thank you. So let's look at a couple of boundaries, types of boundaries. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but hopefully it'll spur your ideas of all the different ways that we can actually have limits in our lives. So the physical, how close do I let someone get to me physically? Obviously, I mean, we talk about abuse or trauma, and now also COVID. Not getting into that, but you see how everyone's experience is going to be different, and how having your own knowledge of what your limits are, what your boundaries could be physical. Sexual boundaries, the ability for you to say yes or no, how you will engage and how you choose not to engage. Your intellectual boundaries, the freedom to think what you want to think and also allow others to think what they want to think. Because again, a boundary is not just for us. When I'm setting it and respecting it for myself, that means I can also choose to honor it in someone else. There's a freedom in letting someone else have their boundaries. So here's where I end and where you begin, whether I agree or disagree. So intellectual boundaries. Time boundaries is huge. We're all asked to do so much. As Ellen said, caretakers, nurturers, workers. That was one of my issues, that my church was asking me to commit to some time things that I wanted to, in my heart, wanted to commit to them and give back and serve, but the time commitment was not something that I could honor. So I had to say a very hard no. And I worked through a bunch of emotions that we're going to get to later in this hour. But so your time, our abilities to say no in our time commitments. Material boundaries, what's physically mine and what is not. Yeah, even our spiritual boundaries. Can y'all think of other boundaries or limits that, you know, might not be listed here? One other course that I taught on this, somebody brought up digital. You know, like how much I scroll, how much what social media I participate in or not, or, you know, are there other limits or things that you might think of?
Well, it's interesting. My daughters do not want me, for example, to write about them or post photos of them on social media. So I don't know if
Mhm.
that's, you know, it's like a privacy, maybe a privacy
Okay,
boundary
yeah.
where they really just feel strongly that, and they, you know, they don't want me writing about them and my posts and all that stuff. So which is sometimes limiting because they're a big part of my life, but that's why I don't talk about them a ton. They have a very strong sense of privacy.
And
Same.
that's respectful of you to honor their boundary. Yes.
Yeah, same with my son, particularly about our grandchildren. Doesn't want digital photos of their kids, which I totally respect and understand. It's just hard for a loving grandma.
Grandparent. Yeah. Well,
Right?
I want to show
So-
people my kids. Yeah.
I would say financial.
Yes. Yeah. And actually that's one of the best examples that a lot of people you can understand more easily, right? It's like if somebody keeps asking you for money and you keep running out of money, whose responsibility is it if you are bouncing checks? Is it theirs because they're the one who keeps asking and guilting you for wanting to help them? Or is it ours? Whose responsibility is it? It's ours. We have to be able to say no at some point to protect our resources. Money, that's a great one, Jill. Thank you. You know, I said bouncing checks to one of my younger clients the other night, and she said, "What does that mean?" I was like, "Oh, never mind."
Right. Yeah, the
Like,
check writing is
okay.
like, it's
All
not,
right.
yeah.
I was like, NSF, y'all don't have that? Okay, whatever. Okay, so boundaries, what it's not, it is not to be used as control. It's not punishment, and it's not discipline. That is more threats and ultimatums that will end up being baseless. But when, you know, I'm doing it to control someone, that's when it's not really fruitful. But when I'm doing it to protect myself, then I'm doing it more out of honoring what I know is good for myself. And then I can address differently how you respond to it. But boundaries are not to be used as control and punishment and discipline because it's ineffective that way. Two myths that I like to cover in this course. A common myth that we have, and you can raise your hand if you've ever thought this, like, I am responsible to make other people happy. It's my job to make sure that they are happy with kids, grandkids, coworkers, but I need to make sure that they're happy. That is actually not true. We're responsible to others, not for them. There is a distinction. You're not responsible for them. For those of you who have grown kids, you are responsible for your children, like their safety, their food, water, shelter, schooling. You were responsible for them until they were 18 to 21. Now you're responsible to them as models, coaches, other relationships, but not for them. They then become responsible for themselves, including their happiness. The other myth is that a boundary would be bad if it actually hurt someone. Anybody think that? Like, if I'm going to say no to somebody and it's hurtful, then I probably shouldn't say no. Do you think, anybody think that? Yeah. So you guys, what I'm going to kind of go over quickly, but is important to know, is the difference between hurt and harm. Think of when you would actually discipline your children, or you know, as a parent disciplining a child. or if you had say no to even to yourself. Let's talk about a self boundary, saying no to something or disciplining your child that no, you cannot have ice cream every day for breakfast. And that hurts their feelings or they get upset. Is that hurt or is that harm? Knowing the difference. So someone might be hurt by it, but that doesn't mean it is any less true or valid of a boundary. And so hurt is not necessarily a bad thing. Someone might be disappointed, someone might get their feelings hurt, but them being hurt is not damaging. So learning the difference between that and harm. If something I'm doing is causing harm, then I might be using a boundary for control or manipulation in some other way. So saying no, like again, disciplining a child, they'll get their feelings hurt and they may cry and say, I hate you or you're awful, but we know that we're doing something that's for the best. So there's just a difference between hurt and harm. Do y'all have any questions about that? Because that, a lot of times we can't say no or set limits because we feel like it's going to hurt someone. But if I can help clear, any questions about that, like for my church, I knew that they were going to be disappointed. But it doesn't make it any less true that I do not have the time to give. Gretchen, you had a question?
Oh, I just was thinking of a statement I heard years ago from, I don't remember, some kind of coach or consultant or something who said something like, I'm 100% responsible for my 50% of the relationship. So that sort of reminds me of what you're talking about a little bit, that, I might need to set a boundary being 100% responsible for myself, but I only have 50% of the responsibility for the relationship.
Yeah, you're not responsible for how they respond or react to that. Yeah, it doesn't make it any less valid if it's true for you. So,
and would you say, I have one question for you about the
Yeah.
hurt and harm. I think it's interesting to think about. So would you think of hurt as kind of suggesting a feeling and harm perhaps suggesting an outcome or a result of something?
I like that
maybe
distinction. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, again, just think of like saying no to coffee for a friend. Somebody might get their feelings hurt, but it doesn't harm them. It's not an outcome that changes the trajectory of anything. I like that distinction a lot. Yeah. Feeling versus an outcome. Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Good question. Okay. I know this is small. Let me see if I can zoom in. Can I zoom in on this? No. Oh, I can. Look at that. Come on, little trackpad. Okay. So I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but remember, they're going to be in your workbook. 7 steps to setting boundaries. While that feels like really cumbersome, like 7 steps, like every time I make a decision, I'm going to go through this. Trust me when I say that as you start to incorporate identifying boundaries and examining where they're needed, this will become much more easier as you keep practicing. So maybe think of the situation or person that you had in mind at the beginning and examine, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling about this person or situation? And really navigate what are all the feelings that you're having about it so that you can fully understand what you're dealing with. I always recommend journaling, writing things down, even though I'll be honest, I hate it, but it's a good psychological practice because it gets things out of your head and into something more tangible. It just helps bring down some walls. So write it out. What is my problem? What is the feelings that I'm having with this person or situation? Identify what is the cause, what is causing you to feel that way. What's causing my symptoms that I'm having? Identify that, whether it's behaviors, actions, parts of the situation. Because when you can identify what's causing it, then you can get to step number 3 of what boundary is being crossed here, or what's being challenged? Is it something physical? Is it my finances? Is it my time or my emotions? And you guys, would it help if I used my big church ask as an example? Would that help at all, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so the worship leader at our church is leaving, gave him 2 weeks notice. And I haven't been back to this church in probably over 2 years, but they called me and they want me to step in as worship leader. Rehearsals 2 nights a week, Sunday mornings, set lists, coordinate with the pastor. And while I've done it before, I know in the way that I commit to something, I go all in and it consumes my brain. And so it's a big ask, though. I mean, how can you say no to a church? People who have a need that needs to be filled. But my immediate response was, I feel the immediate stress about it. So I'm dealing with some guilt, and should I make some room for it, because it's such a noble thing to do? How do you say no to something so noble? So when I identified what my actual boundary conflict was, it was my emotion was one, because I know that, and my mental capacity was another, and my time, because I commit to work. I go home to visit my mom. I do some other things that have my time, my energy. And so I had to really think, do I have the resources, the capacity for this? So I'm wrapping my head around all of this. So then we go to number 4. We've identified what the problem is. Before you move forward on a boundary, it's important to say, what good do I want to protect? Because I don't have to shut everything out, or a person doesn't have to be all or nothing. Let's say, like a toxic family member. You might think, well, a boundary means you're never going to come to Christmas at my house, or I don't want to ever text you ever again. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. What do you want to protect? What part of the relationship or situation do I want to salvage? So like with a toxic family member, I might want to be able to have pleasant conversation at family gatherings, but I don't want you in my house. Or with church, I want to keep my relationships and I want to be able to go worship with them, but I don't want to be responsible for the whole ministry. So figure out what is it that you do want to salvage and what you don't, so that you can decide, what are you responsible for? I committed to my church for something 10 years ago, to do the children's ministry. That I knew I did not want to do, but at the time I had no mature, healthy boundaries. And I just said yes, because that's what you do. You say yes. Good people say yes, right? Kind people, loving people say yes. Within 6 months, I was bitter, angry, overweight, unhealthy, tired, hated God and everybody in my life. And it was everybody else's fault. But so in this situation, I'm choosing to be more responsible. What am I going to take ownership and responsibility of? What I say yes to. Again, using a toxic family member, what am I responsible for? How I respond to texts, how I greet you at a family function or not, how much I keep my distance from you or not. So decide, what is it that you're really responsible for on your side of the fence, on your side of the boundary. And then you can decide what limits actually need to be put in place. Do you know what you want and what you don't want? In my church example, my limits are, I cannot commit to every day of the week, but I'll commit. I actually committed to, I will come when I'm not in New Orleans visiting my mom on a Sunday only. So I cannot be responsible for the ministry, but I will come and lead a worship maybe once a month if my mom doesn't need me. For that toxic family member, do I know what I want? I want you to be able to be there, but I don't want to care. So I put up an emotional boundary where I'm not going to allow your presence to filter into how I feel about the rest of the family or my presence there. Or Gretchen, as you said, when we talk about survivors, and when you said that, I think trauma, and there could be some unhealthy people in our lives. I can be responsible for my distance, at what I want to keep safe, and how I will do that for myself so that I can be free in situations that I find myself in. Now, you guys, when we do this, and in the example of a toxic family member, again, just as an example, step number 7, there may be some grief that comes with that. Grief that a situation that is out of your control, or a person that you cannot change, will not change or cannot change. So grief might be necessary, where it's sad that it's not something that can go the way that you might want it to be better for you. And so when I have forgiveness there, forgiving meaning releasing it, not approving of something, but releasing a person or situation to be as they are. Because when I can say that, then it becomes, you and this situation are as you are. Then I will set boundaries in order for me to protect what is good in my heart, my time, my yard. And so just allow for that possibility that grieving may need to happen when you set a boundary for your own good, because there might be a loss of hope that you wanted something to be different, and that's okay. That is okay. Do y'all have questions on any of these steps? I know I'm kind of like going fast through them.
Well, one thing that occurs to me is, I'm assuming, and this, I don't know if this is a silly question, but I'm assuming that when you set a boundary, it's usually someone is asking you for something and you're saying no. I mean, is that sort of what, like, it's not usually, are there examples where it's like, well, someone's, or I'm doing something, like nobody's asking me for anything, but I'm setting a boundary, or I'm.
Yeah. When I think of the digital stuff or time boundaries, like each of you that's sitting here, you set your own time boundary to be here. You said no to something else so that you could say yes here. And so that's even a boundary that you're setting for yourself. I set aside this time for myself. And so does that make sense? So it's like no one's asking anything of you, really, but each of you made a promise and a commitment to yourself to do something lovely for yourself or invest in yourself in this way. And so you took responsibility for your time. You got your drink, you got your paper and pen, you set aside your quiet space and your Wi-Fi, you got Kong for the dog. And so I don't, Ellen, I don't know where your husband is, but I'm sure you kicked him out somewhere. Right. So, nobody's really asking something of you, but you're like, this is something for me. Or for any of us on social media, setting a time limit on digital, time, setting your own personal boundaries. Does that kind of explain a little bit more too?
Yeah. And I was going to say, if anybody has like a particular example that they want, to have,
yeah, I'm happy to work with,
work through, or
Mhm.
whatever, that this would be a very interesting 7 steps to do that on.
Would anybody like me to help walk through something, or even if it's just a general possible issue?
Well, I have an example. I don't know the extent to which I want to work on it, but just to throw it out as
Good setting your boundary there, Felicia.
a boundary setting challenge with in a friendship, where there isn't something being asked, but there are assumptions, having developed a sort of pattern over years of being there for each other. And I'm realizing I'm there more than I want to be. I don't want to talk every night. I don't want to be the one called on for all the favors and so on. So it's a definite issue that I was aware before this workshop, that I need to set boundaries so that I'm not caught up in this person's life as much as I feel that I would like to be. So
Yeah.
I know I need to work on that. And that's I did bring it up also because it is an example where nothing specific has been necessarily being asked for. There's sort of a pattern of.
Yeah, but it sounds like it might be a consistent source of frustration. And so you realize something needs to happen. And so questions I encourage you to ask yourself is, so what of the friendship do you want to preserve? And what would allow you to show up and feeling good about the friendship? And so it might be, well, I don't want to always feel obligated to spend this much time or to go that deep in conversation. And so as you identify where are the things that you are going farther that cause the frustration for you, then you can identify it for yourself. Maybe I'm not going to be as available, and that can either be a conversation or not. You know, you setting a boundary doesn't always mean that we have to confront someone or tell someone. It could just be something internal. You know, I'm going to release some expectations of this person. I'm not going to be as available because I can really only commit to 1 hour of conversation a week, not the every night. But I don't want to hurt their feelings. So it could be a conversation or not. And then how far you go ahead.
Yeah, I've taken steps of sort of pulling back without feeling the need to make a confrontational conversation about it. I don't know. It might not be necessary.
And then when that's clear for you, Felicia, then you will be able to show up in whatever conversation you choose as freer. Because you know, I'm not going to do this again tomorrow and the next night and the next night. I'll be able to enjoy the way that I do want to show up in this relationship. And I'll let the rest go. So yeah, nothing's being asked, but if it's a source of frustration, then let's figure out where your boundaries need to be.
Thanks.
Yeah, great example. Yeah, Gretchen.
Just a thought, and I can't quite remember exactly what the tagline of tonight's session was from Helen, but there was something about, you know, saying no so that you could say yes, kind of. And I found that really kind of a nice way of thinking about boundaries, you know, that particularly if we've spent any time sort of trying to figure out what we do want to do in our lives, you know, where we do want to put our, you know, vital time and energy that we have, to sort of think of it as being okay to say those no's in order that we can actually have what we're really looking for, what we really want, or et cetera.
Gretchen, it's going to be necessary because we can't go at 100% of what we've been doing and expect to have time and energy and resources for new and exciting things that we want to experience. Using Jill's example of finances, your checkbook, if we keep spending money on the same things, but I want this fun new thing over here, I'm not going to be able to afford it. So something has to give. We've got to decide where we're spending our energy, time, love, finances, all of our resources. Yeah. So
and I think even if it's not something new too, you know, like you might just, you know, I might have to put a boundary around, I can't do a Zoom 5 nights a week because I want to have dinner at a regular time with my husband. You know, so whatever it is, you know, that's not new, but on the other hand, it's important as part of our relationship. You know?
Yeah. So, think of it this, like, is it, or as you challenge yourself against when you're questioning like boundaries or limits or whatever, ask yourself, is this my best yes? Is it my best yes? Is it the best? Because we're given it, even if it's done out of the obstacles, which we're going to cover next. Is it the best yes? Best use of my time, best use of my money, best use of my love. Okay.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to bring up too is the idea that if to Felicia's point, like what if there's a pattern of behavior that you've tolerated for a long time, or, you know, and then suddenly you go and you see Melissa speak on this and you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. It can kind of come as a shock to the other person, or like, how do you frame that where it's like, well, you've had no problem with it for years. Like what now you're decided you don't want to do this anymore, or you don't want to, you know, it's like I decided when after our daughters left that I wasn't cooking dinner anymore. And my husband was like, what? You've been cooking dinner? It's like, exactly. And I've discovered I really don't enjoy it. So that was a real, I had to set that boundary for myself that I'm not cooking for the two of us every night. That's just not my, so it's interesting when people sort of get used to it. Like, how do you come at setting a boundary when you've accepted or tolerated a situation or
Right.
or something for years and years and years potentially?
Yeah, how you communicate it is important if you're changing. And one, expect pushback or expect challenges, because if you have realized the way that you've been operating is no longer serving you, I will say that I'm not going to say the way I've been operating has been unhealthy. So Elaine, if you've enjoyed making dinner, it is what it is. If I'm changing my mind and I don't want to do that anymore, it's not that I've been unhealthy for years. I want to do something different. I don't want to work as much anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. It is okay to change your mind and change how you operate. And so it will, and if it's the best thing for you, then we are asking the others in our life to accommodate and to adjust. And so expect that adjustment period, including some pushback, especially if kids, it's like, well, mom, you've been, you've given me money every month for so long. Why are you saying no now? Well, that is not working for me anymore. It's not my best yes anymore. I'm taking responsibility of what I'm responsible for. And I'm sorry that hurts you. I'm sad that disappoints you. It doesn't make it any less true for me that I need to do this to be the healthiest version of myself. Let me know if I can answer any questions for you as you adjust. So there's lots of ways to communicate it, but especially if you're expecting pushback or if you're asking others to adjust, how we communicate, it's not saying what you're doing is wrong for me, but the way I have been operating is not working for me anymore. And so I'm going to start doing things that are the healthiest and my best yes for me. And it might mean changes on your side.
And I guess then it also means being, demonstrating and modeling, being accepting when others come to you wanting to change it up and saying I'm like, yeah, or whether it's your kids or anybody else who are like, yeah, I know when I was in college, I would call you every Sunday. I don't want to do that anymore,
Right.
or whatever.
Or your kids who are saying, please don't share my pictures. It's like,
Right.
well, that's my grandkids. I can share pictures if I want. But you respecting their requests too, shows that we can respect each other's limits. And that's a sign of a healthy relationship. Yeah. Okay, good, you guys. I love when we can find real world examples. All right, so why is it so gosh darn hard? Well, here's why. A lot of times we don't say no, we don't set limits. Again, whether it's someone asking something of us or just in our world, our own experiences and our own habits and patterns, because of these feelings that we would need to address. Sometimes we feel guilty. And what that looks like and sounds like is, well, I feel bad. I don't want it to be my fault that someone's upset. And so we feel like we're doing something wrong by making some protective measures for ourselves. The fact is, you're not guilty of something. So it's important to know these feelings so that you can address them, because otherwise it'll be the end of it. I feel bad. I don't want to hurt them. So I will keep doing such and so, right? And then I wonder why I'm bitter and resentful years later because I'm tired, exhausted, or spent. And so helping, like that original step in the step process is identifying what is happening, what are my feelings, identifying if I'm feeling guilty about something. Shame is a big one. Ellen mentioned that I'm a certified Daring Way facilitator. Do y'all know who Brene Brown is? Anybody know who?
Oh,
Brene
yeah,
Brown is?
I have one of her books.
Okay, so I am trained in her programming, and it's big on teaching shame. And so shame is feeling like, not that I did something bad, what guilt is, but shame is I am bad. And so if I am setting a boundary or setting a limit or doing something, protecting myself, as if I don't have a right to, I don't deserve this. So as if I am bad. And so I struggle with setting a boundary. I'll admit, so with my church decision, I dealt with I dealt with all of these, frankly. So I'll save that to the end. Sometimes we fear things. What if my kids pull away? What if they don't like me? What if they don't love me? If I say no to something, or if I set limits, or if I stand up for myself in this way. Fear can also keep us still. Obligation. I once stayed in a job because I felt obligated to someone, and that's just not the case. So if they did something for me, I guess I should do something for them. If someone does something for you, the only thing that we have to say is thank you. Obligation is not a reason to cross boundary lines for you, because then again, we will end up being the ones who are frustrated or tired or bitter and resentful. So obligation is another one. And then conditioning is another way that we have trouble with setting our own boundaries, is because I never saw them modeled in my home. Or when someone did try to set a boundary or set limits or say something that was important to them, we might have learned from a childhood experience that that was not a good thing to do. Like somebody got repercussions, somebody got yelled at, somebody got beat because of it. And so you learn, oh, I can't speak up for myself because of some past experiences. And so sometimes our conditioning tells us it's not good for you to stand up for yourself. You don't deserve to create your life experience. And so these are the things that really keep us from being able to set limits in our lives, to be free to choose what I am responsible for and what I'm not, what is okay and what is not. So in my church experience, I had to deal with guilt feelings. Am I doing something bad by saying no to them? The answer is no, I'm not doing something bad. Shame. Am I a bad person for saying no? No, I'm not a bad person. God still loves me. People in my world still loves me. People might be disappointed, but that does not make me a bad person. I could have let fear do it. Whew, they're going to be mad at me. They are not going to like me. People are going to talk about me. Ugh, so I'll just say yes, because I don't want to have to deal with Sandra Porter, so I just do something because I don't want somebody mad at me. I could feel obligated. Well, some people in that church have done wonderful things for me, so I should do this for them. You guys, if I did it because I should, and I get angry, resentful later, live in a source of frustration, my work suffers, my relationship at home suffers, who's responsible? I am, because I put myself in a position where I did not have the resources to give a best yes. So I had to deal with all of that, and I gave a very loving no, I'm sorry, I can't. But I can't do this, but I can do this. And then anything that I give there is free. So a healthy no, so my yes can be free and joyful. And that's our ultimate goal, right? Is to be able to have the joy in our lives.
So did they ask you why, or like what, is that something that you're, like if people want an explanation, do you owe them an explanation?
You don't owe. For my church, at least I gave it. I gave that I do not have the time or energy to commit to something that you're asking the way that I know that I would commit to it. Now, they don't need my whole boundary lesson. I do not, if you're still upset with my answer, whose responsibility is that?
Mhm.
Theirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I can keep trying to help you understand it. I can keep trying to exhaust myself to say, but no, wait, what about this answer? Does this answer please you? At some point, no might upset someone else. It doesn't make it any less true for me that I cannot do that job and be my healthiest version of myself. And so if they're upset by it, I can give as much of an answer as possible, but their reaction, their response is their responsibility. It is not mine to fix it and make it better for them. Because at the end of the day, my answer to their request is no. Well, not this, but this. So that's a good question.
And it's okay if the no is a no and not some compromise either. Like in
Yeah.
your case, you were able to, you found something that you could give, but
Mhm.
it could very well be that you could have said no and then not given them, but I'll do
Any
this.
answer. No, you don't owe anyone anything. Let's a toxic family member. Hey, can this person come to Christmas? They haven't been here in a while and I'd like them to come. Not in my house. No. If y'all want to have Christmas, you can have it at your house and I will see y'all another day. You know, the answer is just no. And I'm using, big, weightier examples, but no, we don't. And that could be, how much you want to protect in that relationship, how much information you want to give and help them understand. But at the end of the conversation, if they understand or agree, it does not change what you know to be true and good for you.
And there's not always a compromise position. I mean, we try to veer away from just looking at things black and white, but sometimes there is no gray in a situation. Sometimes there's a boundary that just is very solid and
Yeah, that's why the definition is what's okay and what's not okay. You guys, when you get your workbook, I'm going to encourage you to go through these reflection questions for a multitude of things. So that you can kind of think on things yourself. Who or what do you feel responsible for? I do encourage you to look at where are the healthy boundaries in your life? What's really working? What relationships do you have and situations that you're in that respect your limits? And another way to look at that is, where do you feel free? Where do you feel good and joyful and free to be you, be authentic, make decisions, say yes or no, identify them, because then you can continue to invest there. That's why it's very important that you identify them. Sometimes we take them for granted because they're so easy. It's like, oh, I didn't even realize that this person is great for my boundaries. They're constantly respecting and honoring my boundaries, or I've been showing up like this all along. This is awesome. I'm doing a great job here. It's important you acknowledge your wins. And then ask yourself, where are some unhealthy boundaries? Where do I feel frustrated, powerless on a consistent or frequent basis? And then, so what situation or relationship needs your attention so that you can feel freedom and joyful about it more than you do now? And the attention, again, it might be a confrontation, it might be a conversation, it might just be something internal. And that's okay, because again, the whole point of boundaries is to protect what is good in you and in your world. So I do encourage you to go through those reflection questions. And then this is just me, but y'all will get me. I do work with, I am a counselor, a licensed professional counselor and a supervisor. A certified Daring Way facilitator, and now I'm also a coach. And I do focus on midlife the way Ellen does. That's how her and I got hooked up. And especially since I could have lost my whole life in my own midlife crisis a couple of years ago, I've learned that I'm dedicating most of my time now to helping others avoid the other pitfalls, and boundaries is a huge one that helps us be free in those next decisions, the next seasons, the next wonderful, joyful things that we get to do.
it's it sounds like what you were saying earlier too. To me, that made a lot of sense, that you can, have all these feelings and feel bad about setting a boundary, or you can disregard your feelings and not set the boundary. But in the end, those feelings it'll be difficult feelings that you'll feel.
Yes.
So there's no way to avoid a bad feeling.
Hard
either way.
feelings.
So you can either have the boundary with a bad feeling or not have the boundary with a bad feeling. So which is better,
Which hard are you going to choose? You can either, and that's true, exactly, Ellen. And the one difference is when you set a boundary for yourself and honor it, and you go through those hard feelings, that's temporary. So if I had said yes to my church, like I did 10 years ago, and did something that I knew I wasn't being called to do. It was not going to be good for my time, my energy, nothing. My hard feelings were consistent, pervasive, long-term, unending. The hard feelings that I went through in setting the boundary here to say a healthy no, loving no, protective yes, temporary.
Interesting.
So
Good point. Yeah.
pick which hard you want to work on, because you're going to work on it one way or another. You'll either live in it or you will work through it and get to a better place on the other side. That's what those obstacle feelings are. Know that you're dealing with one of those. And so if I can deal with those things and get through that, there's freedom and joy on the other side.
Yeah. That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense.
Good point.
Good thought.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that came up for me was when you feel someone has violated a boundary with you, what is the best way to bring it up to them? I mean,
Yeah, I would say as direct communication as possible, and email, text, find it. I would say the level of communication should be equal to the level of the relationship.
Mhm.
But if you are the one that actually needs to set a boundary and communicate something, and maybe it's confronting, like I do not allow people to talk to me that way. So if you're going to still talk to me this way, then you and I will not continue having the conversation. Or it could be something is off for me and I need to share it with
Right.
you.
Mhm.
You hurt my feelings, or I got my feelings hurt. And so I am feeling distant. This is what you did, and this is how I experienced it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to need to, keep my distance from you. Because I did have to do this with a friend who at one point was going through a divorce, and she called me every night to expound on everything that happened every time. And so like every time the phone would ring, I was like, God, do I have 2 hours right now? I don't. So do I just, so I eventually I did tell her, hey, I know that you are hurting right now. I'm not able to talk for that long every night. So sometimes I may not be able to answer the phone, but I promise you, I will call you another time, or I'll call you back. And we'll make a plan where I can sit and have that kind of time for you. So I'm sorry, I'm not as available as you might need right now. And that was hurtful for her at the time, because she felt going through a divorce, like everybody should be rallying. It's like, and yes, I was there as much as I could, but I wasn't her therapist, and I don't have 2 hours every night to devote for months at a time. But so eventually we got to a really good place when our conversations were good. They were long. I had committed my time to it. And so because the quality of the friendship was such that I was able to communicate with her, she was able to express back to me, and we got to a much better place. So the communicating of it, how you communicate, is my biggest recommendation on how you communicate a boundary is stick to your side of the fence. Stick to here's my experience, stick to I statements. Because the second we go, you need to change what you're doing. You need to tell me, blah, 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 or you need to do this. They're going to get defensive. Oh yeah. And now we're fighting. But if I say, here's what I'm experiencing and here's what I need to do to make sure that I'm healthy, it's a less defensive stance.
It's a very appropriate way of asserting oneself. I like the way you approach that, and I've learned that some years ago about in the context of becoming more assertive.
Or like political conversations around my family dinner table. Don't anybody bring up politics, religion, or COVID. And so we've had to learn. I've learned to say, hey, if this conversation is going to keep going, I'm going to go in the other room, or can we change the subject? Let's go on to a happier thing or something else. And so I'm not saying, can you all shut the hell up because you're pissing me off? I'm saying I can't hold this anymore. I would really like to go to happier things. I'm not saying anything about you guys. I just need something different. And if y'all want to continue, that's great. I'm going to go get me some ice cream.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
side of the fence.
Yeah.
That's all. Keep telling yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Great job, y'all.
Anything else from anybody?
No, just thank you very much. It was really good.
Gretchen,
Yeah,
my
thank
pleasure,
you.
y'all.
This
Thank
is
you.
so
Helpful.
helpful. We really appreciate you being here.